Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have been waiting actually a very long time for this moment and hope that we could do this in person. Unfortunately, did not let us do that, but I believe today's virtual presentation will have a similar impact on you as it did for me when I first learned of Mr. Rembert. Our talk today illuminates the life and work of Winfred Rembert, an incredible man and brilliant artist, originally from Cuthbert, Georgia. He lived, worked, and died in New Haven. In fact, he just passed away last year in March of 2021. Mr. Winfred grew up in a family of Georgia field laborers and joined the civil rights movement as a teenager. He was arrested after fleeing a demonstration, survived a near lynching at the hands of law enforcement, and spent 7 years on chain gangs. During that time, he met Patsy, who would later become his wife. Years later, at the age of 51, with Patsy's encouragement, he started drawing and painting scenes from his youth using the leather tooling skills he learned in prison. Chasing me to my grave is his story, has told to Tufts professor Erin Kelly. Mr. Rembert recalls the vibrant scenes of Black life on Cuthbert's Hamilton Avenue, where he first glimpsed the possibility of a life outside the cotton field. This work is a heartfelt tribute to Cuthbert's Black community and Patsy. In it, he brings to life the promise and dangers of the civil rights protests, the brutalities of incarceration, his search for his mother's love, and the bond he shared with Patsy. We have the immense honor and pleasure of being with Erin, Patsy, and Lillian Rembert, who will share the wondrous life of Winfred Rembert. Thank you all. Just a couple of Zoom logistics before we get started. Please use the chat for comments and Q&A for questions. If we have some time at the end, we will have people raise their hands and ask their questions. So without further ado.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for inviting us here. Many thanks to the Ferguson Library. I'm super excited to be talking about this book together with Winfred's wife, Patsy Rembert, and his daughter, Lillian Rembert. It's going to be a very special afternoon to be able to have a conversation together with them about his life, his legacy, and how they knew the man. Again, thanks to the Ferguson Library, the love that we've received from libraries and librarians for this book so far has been very meaningful. I'm proud to say that Chasing Me to My Grave was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal of Excellence in the nonfiction category, and it was also chosen by Booklist editors as their most recommended adult nonfiction top of the list book for 2021. So we're really grateful to that generous acknowledgement and the role of libraries and librarians in that recognition. I also want to thank the Stamford, Connecticut NAACP for co-sponsoring this event, which is very exciting. So what I'd like to do is to introduce you to Winfred with a picture of him. I'm going to share my screen now. First, a picture of the book that I wrote together with Winfred that was published in September, the subject of our discussion today. And you will hear about the themes of the book and about Winfred. Here's a picture of Winfred in one of his more serious moments. As Elizabeth mentioned, he was born in 1945 and died in 2021, March 31st of last year. So we're very sad that he's not here with us to talk about the book, to celebrate the book, and to share his thoughts about and dreams about the book. But we will honor him as best we can and acknowledge his accomplishments and our appreciation for his accomplishments. So as Elizabeth told you, Winfred was an artist. He worked on leather using leather tooling skills that he learned in prison in the late 1960s. He didn't begin his serious work as an artist until the age of 51, when he was living in New Haven and had been encouraged by his wife, Patsy, to tell his life stories on leather, using his leather tooling skills. And then he dyed these leather canvases in very colorful ways. And we're going to be showing you a bunch of images of his paintings today as we talk about his story. His talent was recognized by Yale University. Jock Reynolds, the director of the Yale University Art Gallery, exhibited Winfred's paintings, and Yale bought some of his paintings in 2000. His paintings have been shown elsewhere in Connecticut at the New Haven Museum, as well as at museums and galleries around the country. The Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts in Alabama showed some of his pictures, and Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative admired them and learned about Winfred and honored him at the Equal Justice Initiative, and became very interested in Winfred's work and ended up writing a wonderful foreword to the book. So I wanted to mention that and our appreciation for that. There have also been two wonderful documentaries about Winfred's art and his life, one called All Me and the other Ashes to Ashes. So I recommend those. Now I want to show another picture of Winfred, wonderful picture, so you can get a sense of how dynamic Winfred was. And that comes out in the many themes and stories in the book, showing all sides of this wonderful, complicated, deep person with a lot of knowledge and life experience to share. One of the things that's really special about this book is that it's told both in Winfred's words and from his perspective, and also with the images of his artwork. So there are more than 75 color reproductions of his artwork in the book, and it's a wonderful way to learn about his artwork and to understand the stories that are being told in the artwork, right alongside with Winfred's narration of them. So that's very exciting, and Bloomsbury just did a wonderful job in reproducing these magnificent pieces of art as illustrations of the book. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to stop the share for a moment because I want to read a couple of paragraphs from the preface of the book and then turn it over to Lily and Patsy to talk a little bit about Winfred's dreams for the book. But to get that conversation started, I'm just going to read some of Winfred's words about his thoughts about the book, where it came from, and what he was hoping for from the book, and then we'll discuss that. So he says, writing this book has been a lifelong dream of mine. Ever since I was released from prison, I have wanted to tell the story of me. I left Cuthbert, Georgia in chains. It was 1967. I got locked up as a nobody. Prison made sure I was still a nobody when in 1974 I was released. Some people in Cuthbert never knew what happened to me. I want people, especially the people I knew, to understand what happened and why I spent 7 years on the chain gang. I've been sharing my story as an artist for almost 25 years. My pictures are carved and painted on leather using skills I learned in prison. Leather can take a beating, and whatever you do with it, it will hold its shape. You can carve it up and it will hold your picture. My pictures tell about cotton plantations, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and my time as a prisoner. They celebrate the people I knew and loved and how they lived. These are my memories of Black life in the 1950s and 1960s, and how those of us who left the South took it with us and kept it. I want to share my memories with the people who lived through what I lived through. Even after I found success as an artist in Connecticut and New York City, I dreamed of going home. Even though I've wanted to tell my story for years, I was afraid to draw attention to what happened in Cuthbert, Georgia during my lifetime and to me. I was worried about whether people would believe me or care, and whether the real people I named might in some way or other retaliate. I wasn't sure how to talk about my search for my mother's love or the bond I feel with Patsy. But my time in this world is up, so there's no better time. This may be the perfect time. So he wrote that September 2020. So I would like to invite Patsy and Lillian now to share their thoughts about Winfred's dreams for this book.
Well, when I first read that last part, it's being his daughter, I was unaware that he was thinking of such thoughts. You know, when I read the last part of that, I actually cried because that was September and me and him are joking, laughing and things like that. So it was really, really tough. Like my father's a man that knew what he wanted to do and how to do it and get it done, you know, even though if he was scared inside. So this whole reading his words and things of his explaining his life, the briefest way he did it, it meant so much to hear him and to hear that part of him where he wasn't just my father, he was Winfred looking for his mother out by the railroad tracks. So you know, it made me miss him a lot more. Not to say I didn't miss him. It's just there was just enough time. But as an adult now, we could have had so many more conversations about, hey, Dad, what can I do with this? And that's what I missed, the wisdom that he held. So for the books, I think it's doing exactly what he wanted, or he would have never left. He would have never left. He's just that stubborn. Would have still been here with us, doing these Zoom meetings with you and Aaron, Mom and you, Aaron. And I think he knew he did what he was supposed to do. And that's rare that people leave the earth doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And I think he knew this book was going to be exactly what it is now. Just one of the greatest things I've ever read in my life, because it's my parents, it's my father. So, and I'm sure Mom could contest to that, you know, that's a lot of life. And to come out on top in a way and say, you know what I've done, I'm going to rest now. And I'll see you when I see you, Patsy. So I think it's a beautiful thing. He kept his promise to her. So, and we're going to help continue his promise.
You know, it's easy and it's hard talking about one. It's easy to talk about him because he was so open to you and for us to understand. And he kept some things from me. That last part of that book, he knew that he had completed his task. But at the same time, he didn't want to burden me with worrying. His main words to me was always, don't worry, I'll take care of it. He was a man full of love and full of life. And he had a lot of knowledge. And I feel if he had been, he could have been a scientist or a doctor, had his life not been interfered with by others. He taught himself not only about different aspects of the world, but he taught himself about so much wisdom and knowledge that he had, that he was sharing and trying to teach me as well. Because my view of life was all from a storybook. I was raised to be a wife, finish school, get married, and have children. But he taught me that it was much more to life than just having children. There was a tremendous need for life and enjoyment. Even though he was struggling, you couldn't tell it by the way he carried himself. And his children, how he tried to make sure they was happy at all times and had whatever they desired. A lot of people thought, and a lot of his children thought he was rich, but we was not rich, but he made it seem so. Because anything and everything that was needed, he found a way to get it. But at the same time, as gentle and sweet as he was also a man of his word. He also was a protector of his family and had no fear of anybody. And I think he gave his life for his family. Family meant a lot to him. And to raise those boys, I never seen his face so happy as when those boys was around him and he's watching the Super Bowl and they in and them, that was the best time of his life. He loved sharing things with them and wanting them to stand up for themselves. Don't be a bully. Never start anything, but be able to finish if it should start. So there's a lot to be said about him that I like to share with a lot of people, different things.
Thank you so much. You're both giving us such a meaningful sense of why he will be missed. I'd like to share a little bit more about his story and his background with our audience by talking about some of his paintings. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back now to the slides so we can talk together about some of the life events that are recorded in the book and shine through in Winfred's story. So this is a painting called The Beginning. It's a painting that Winfred painted about himself as a baby being given from his birth mother to his great aunt named Lillian Rembert. We get a sense of where his daughter Lillian's name came from by understanding what this picture's about. So Winfred's birth mother gave him up. He was raised by Lillian Rembert. And this painting of that scene, very intimate scene, which was quite painful for Winfred and something he struggled with throughout his life. As Lillian mentioned a few minutes ago, he had a kind of quest for his mother's love in his mind and ended up painting painting of himself walking down the railroad tracks looking for her, which is a powerful image of the book that you'll find at the end of the book if you read the book. This picture is a wonderful example of his leather work. You can see the texture on the leather. You can see where he's carved the leather. He's dyed some of it is left undyed here. So it's an interesting example of his work to give you a sense of the texture of it, a kind of sculptural quality of it. So Winfred lived with his great aunt Lillian, who he called Mama, on a cotton farm plantation outside of Cuthbert, Georgia. They lived in a tenant farmer's shack on the side of the field, and Lillian picked cotton in the field. Here's a picture of Winfred on her cotton sack. If you look in the middle at the bottom of the painting, you'll see a little boy on the cotton sack of a woman who's working in the field. That's Winfred. He said he remembers going out to the fields with her as a very young child. These are some of his earliest memories. And here he's sharing those memories with us as a magnificent work of art and beauty, even though the experience was not a beautiful experience. It was a very difficult experience doing work in the cotton fields. And I'd like Patsy to talk to us a little bit about what work in the cotton fields was like. Here's a picture called Dinner Time in the Cotton Field, which I know is one of Patsy's favorite stories. So I want to ask you, Patsy, if you'll just talk a little bit about this painting and about the history of people's experience, Black people's experience working in the cotton fields in Georgia. And I'll show a couple more pictures while you're talking about it.
This is one of my favorite pictures that he done because it's just like a picture out of my life. I worked in the cotton field. I wasn't that good at it, but I was out there. And the experience of working in it don't come nowhere near the beauty and the way that he presents it in his artwork. Because you're sitting out there and you're picking cotton and you're getting stuck and it's hot. There's no shade. And he just made work look beautiful. But I don't suggest you do it. I want to do it, but he made it look beautiful. And it's an all-day thing. You could work all day long and not finish a row. That's how long some of the rows was. And you only got two cents a pound. So if you pick 200 pounds, you got $2. That was not a lot of money. But, and then most of them had a commissary. So you knew you could get something from the commissary. That way they kept you in debt so you couldn't leave. So most of the people that left the South left at night because they owed somebody, and like the commissary for what they had got. So they couldn't leave in the daytime normally. They would mostly leave at night and go north to try to have a better life. Young women had babies in the field and they couldn't even leave. They'd stay on in the field and go right back to work. They had dogs that would babysit. I know that seems so far-fetched, but dogs babysit to make sure snakes and stuff wouldn't get around the babies. So we had a lot of things that was going on that a normal life, it just was not a normal life. But through all the suffering and the toiling that we had to deal with, we would find a way, and that's what I don't think they could understand, to have fun on the weekend and to make one another's life a little joyful. And Winfred knew how to bring those pictures to life for me. And I thought it was something that needed to be told. Now, Winfred didn't get much of a formal education because he didn't get to go to school but a couple of days, or maybe a day or two in the week. And most of the time he had to pick cotton, and that's during the time of schooling, but he didn't get that opportunity. So Miss Prater was somebody that he often talked about, and how much he loved her for not embarrassing him and causing him to be embarrassed by asking him questions that she knew he couldn't answer, having him to read when she knew he couldn't read. And he loved her for that. But she did try to teach him. He said he just couldn't catch it. He had got so far behind till it was useless. But I don't think it was useless. I think he just wasn't ready to accept it. And he was upset with the fact that he couldn't go to school when he needed to go. So why even learn? But Miss Prater was so nice and so sweet that she made the days that he did get a chance to come, she made them pleasant. Winfred could draw even then. The only thing Winfred learned on the chain gang was how to do the leather. He could always draw. He had a talent and a gift to draw. And later on, we found out my husband could sing. I found that out the day, 2 days before we married. I didn't know he could sing before we married. I had no idea. I know he had said that they had a group, but you know, just like everybody else, you sing in the choir. You ain't really got to be singing. You can just be back there making noise. I had no idea. And he had a voice like an angel. And he sung this song to me, I Believe in You by Johnny Taylor. My yard was full of people, young boys who come out, because what we call them then was suitors. You could have more than one boy. My daddy believed that you had to date more than one young man so you wouldn't be making a mistake when you married one. You'd have a chance to view them. But when Winfred sung that song, they all shook their heads and said, it's over. Because it was just so beautiful. To know him, it's no middle ground. Let me come back to that. There's no middle ground with Winfred. You either liked him or you hated him. And he preferred the like part, but even his enemies he would talk to. He knew people that didn't like him and he would make it on a point to talk to them. And I just couldn't understand it. He said, well, maybe eventually I'll win him over. But he was
so Patsy, yes. So I want to talk a little bit more about how Winfred came to meet you and a little bit more about his story, when, you know, how it was that he ended up in your yard in the way that you were just describing. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to fill people a little bit more in on the background so that they understand how you came to know each other, and in particular, how he ended up in prison, which is an important part of the book, and begins really with this scene. This is a picture of Hamilton Avenue, which is the main street in the black part of town in Cuthbert, Georgia, where there were black establishments, pool halls, juke joints, shops, and so on. And when Winfred was a teenager, he was so sick and tired of working in the cotton fields that he ran away from home in order to avoid being forced to work in the field. And he ran down to Hamilton Avenue and discovered this community, which was a joyful thing for him, to find a community he could be a part of. And he began to frequent the pool halls and the juke joints, dancing with other kids, I presume singing as well, since Patsy mentioned how enthusiastic he was about singing and what a beautiful voice he had. This is one of the juke joints that he spent time in. And here's another one called the Dirty Spoon Cafe, which he said he wasn't allowed to go in because it was only for adults, but he did look through the window and learn dance moves from all the people who he admired that were dancing in these ways that he wanted to learn about. And this is a scene that he observed through the window at the Dirty Spoon. This is Homer Clyde's place. People would eat, play pool, dance, and Winfred remembers that when Homer Clyde, after he had served lunch to his paying customers, he would open up the restaurant to poor people who didn't have money. They would come in and be welcome there, which was very meaningful to Winfred. And he also met other kids. This is a swimming hole where they love to go and swim, fish, and spend the day playing. So these were really fond, wonderful memories for Winfred that nourished him throughout his life, including the time that he was in prison, which was a very bleak set of years in his life. And these were important memories that he was able to return to in his mind. And you can see how vibrant they remained. I mean, this was something that he painted later in his life, but the memory was just as fresh and exciting as it was when he first experienced it. At least that's the way it seemed when he talked about it to me. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about how he ended up in prison. And it began when he was working in the story. That part of the story began with his working in Jeff's cafe and pool room, where he racked the pool balls and collected the money for Jeff, and got to know people there and discovered that it was a place where people would meet to talk about the unfolding civil rights movement and the activities that were happening in Southwest Georgia. People who would come to talk about the movement and how to take part in it. And Winfred became very interested in this and decided to participate in the civil rights movement and went to some demonstrations in Americus, Georgia. Here's a scene from a fateful day in his life when he participated in a civil rights demonstration in Americus that turned violent. People fled as shots rang out and Winfred ran down an alley. When he did that to get away from the violence, he turned around to see two white men pursuing him with shotguns. He saw a car with the keys in it. He jumped in the car and fled. He drove the car back to Cuthbert, Georgia, and was later arrested for larceny of the automobile. He was put in prison, well, in the local jail in Cuthbert, where he sat for months, over a year, with no charges he was aware of, no visitors, nothing happening. He got frustrated and plugged the toilet with some toilet paper, flooded the place, and the deputy sheriff came back to the cell and began to beat him up. At this point, although Winfred hadn't planned to get into a fight with him or to even fight back when it began happening, he ended up struggling with the deputy and taking the deputy's gun away from him. He locked the deputy in the cell and he fled. He was later arrested again and taken by an angry mob of white people, including law enforcement officials and civilians, out to the edge of Cuthbert to the woods where he thought he would be killed. He was not killed, but they threatened to lynch him. In fact, they hung him in a tree by his feet and injured him quite severely. Apparently, someone decided that they ought not kill him, and they brought him back to to the jail and later taken before the judge who sentenced him to 27 years in the Georgia State Penitentiary. He served 7 of those years, most of them on chain gangs, which became a theme later in life of his artwork. This is a painting called All Me. It's an exquisite painting, very sophisticated, in my opinion, very modern in some ways, also very autobiographical, a scene of prisoners on the chain gang. It was the first painting of Winfred's that I ever saw. I found it fascinating and important. I myself, as a philosopher, was working on a book about the philosophy of criminal justice and the history of the criminal justice system, thinking about how we think about criminal justice in the United States. And I became interested in this painting about prisoners, and especially when I learned that it was painted by someone who had been formerly incarcerated, and it was about his life. So I arranged to meet Winfred and to interview him as part of my book project. And that opened the door to me to getting to know him, finding out more about his life and his art, what a fascinating person he was. And I learned that he had a story that he wanted to tell that he hadn't fully told, even though he'd been telling his life story in the form of artwork for many years, and had been talking publicly about some of the things that happened to him, including his near lynching. This painting is called All Me. Winfred explained that he had to be more than one person within himself to survive the brutality of the chain gang. So this represents all the different roles he had to take on in order to survive the brutality, to fight back, to be tough. He didn't identify with any of the roles. There was no room for him to be the person he wanted to be, but he couldn't be nobody. So he decided to be all of these roles. And this painting thus is called All Me. He painted several versions of this painting. I'm going to show you another version of it, but let me invite Patsy if she wants to talk a little bit about this painting and All Me. I invite you to join me if you'd like.
Take over that part of it.
Okay. Lillian, would you like to comment on this painting?
I believe it's not even more just about the changing, just who he has to be throughout his whole life. Especially I've seen my dad be my dad, and then sometimes he's the big brother where he's teaching us how to play games, and sometimes he's my mother's husband when he's coming in from the fields like, oh, where's my pork chops, Patsy? So I think from a very early age, he had to learn how to be so many different selves, and it was sometimes. And you know, I feel for him because he knew he couldn't be one person to survive this world. He had to think fast on his feet, and he had to be tough, even if, fake it till you make it. So that's why the All Me, he has several of these. It's heart-wrenching, but it's also just how his trials and tribulations are made to look so beautiful and symmetrical and so less than what it is, but it's also complicated because he's got his head down. There's other people with his showing looking directly at us, and there's other people to the side. So there's that boldness, like there's the guy in the middle, he's looking straight at us. It's almost like he can see us. That's my dad said, what's the worst can happen? We're gonna get in this car, Patsy, and we're gonna go fishing, and we're gonna feed these kids, we're gonna find this, we're gonna do that. And then, there's the other side when he would talk to our landlord that was ready to kick us out. And he was really like, upset, and would tell her he was less than a man. Mom always thinks us older three, we're always listening and peeking and things like that. So that's another side of him, and that's the All Me philosophy. And he taught it to us. He said, you can't just be one person in this world, Lillian. How are you going to get through this? How are you going to get through that? So it's the trial and error of being yourself, because you have to be, as a Black person in this world, you have to be many. There's no way, you can't get around it, or you're lost. And I think he was okay with it, which is why he has so many of these. He was okay being the bad guy, the good guy, and whatever is in between. So, and my mom, he was just, she can attest to that. She's like, go speak to your father. I said, I don't know, I want to hear Winfred. Well, I'll wait till he's Winfred before I go talk to him and ask him for like a quarter. If he's dad, I'm not getting any money. So, and I think that's the magic of our realness. This man figured out, and he didn't fight it. I'm going to be all these people, and that's that.
Oh, baby, thank you. Thank you.
You
You
know,
did it so well.
Yeah, you did.
Eric, what would you like me to talk about now? You showing some of the slides of the pictures that he did?
Yes, this is some of the work that they were forced to do on the chain gang, digging ditches.
just the
digging-
resiliency of him. Because if you saw him in his younger days, he didn't look like he had so much. Like I told mom up until like when he was 70, that's the first time I've ever seen that man with a black eye. The man was, to me, he was invincible. He's like, and like the toys, like how he got hurt at the job. I've never seen him limp. It was just something that I just like, I don't know. Especially this is the one. That's my dad from the 70s. Like, a little bit with more hair, afro, stout.
Yeah, this is a self-portrait.
Yes.
Self-portrait.
When
on the
when he would
chain
tell
gang.
people these stories about what happened to him, they're looking at him and it doesn't look like anything's ever happened to you, So I think that's the magic of him being on me. He knew he had to show a certain thing to this person, to that person, and this one. But he was always himself with Patsy Jane here. He was always himself.
Patsy, let's hear more about your story with him. Tell us about this painting and about you meeting Winfred.
Oh, that's in my yard. And my two sisters are hanging clothes, and I think I like for Ligon to finish it out. My two sisters are washing the clothes, and my two brothers are coming down with the tub because we had to draw water. We didn't have no running water. And my dad is sitting there shopping, and my mom is pushing clothes down in the pot because we had to boil our clothes, and that's me in the rubbing tub. We had chickens, pigs, and different things. We had a little small farm, and it was okay.
It was a mansion to me. I was a sickly kid. So to me, it was a mansion. And I had a couple of summers with my mother's family. Well, not my mother's side of the family. And I'm telling you, my father depicts the beauty of how the Gamages work. They work as one unit. They have very distinct personalities, but I mean, they are a unit. They are the best battalion ever. So my grandmother was there, and my grandfather, who he carried a big stick but walked quietly. And my grandmother was the complete opposite of that, where if she was quiet, something had to be wrong. So,
So Lillian, what did you hear about how Winfred and Patsy met?
Oh, we had to hear that story 1,000 times, but Mom, you tell it.
Oh my God. Well, Winfred come up into my yard, and I was washing clothes, and I looked back and I saw he was a prisoner, and I ran in the house and I told my father there was a prisoner in the yard. And my dad came to the door, and he had his gun, he had his shotgun. He said, "What you boys want?" And Winfred said, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, we just want some water." So my mother, being the type of lady she was, she come around, she said, "Well, boys, y'all working down there?" He said, "Yes, ma'am, we gotta fix this bridge where the water done washed part of the bridge away in order for y'all to be able to get out on this end." So my mama said, "Well, then you come up here every day at 12 and I have lunch fixed for y'all." So that's what she done till she found out that he had eyes for me, and then she started making excuses that she couldn't be home. So then Winfred said, "Well, I guess he said in his mind, that's okay. I'm gonna find out which way her school bus go." And he would stop the school bus. He would put dirt in the middle of the road. He'd take his machine and pile up a whole lot of dirt in the road so the bus would have to stop. And he did that for so many times. And the bus driver finally told me, he said, "Why don't you just tell him you're gonna write him?" Because he'd go around the bus saying, "Come on, girl, write me, write me." He had a way of talking. "Come on, write me. I'm all alone. I don't know nobody. I'm new down here. Write me." Until finally the bus driver said, "Just tell him you're gonna write him. And if you don't, so he can stop making me be late for getting to school." So finally he wrote me. He actually wrote me first. And after reading that letter, I had to answer it. But I had to answer it, I would have to write it at night, mail it at school, and take his letters down in the woods and read them, because I couldn't afford to be caught reading his letters or them to know that I was receiving a letter from a prisoner. So finally I decided, my girlfriend and I decided we go pay him a visit. So she met me halfway, and I would go over to my grandmother's house to comb her hair. And I would comb her hair, she'd be an Indian, I put it in those 2 big plaits. And then I would ask her, can I go to the store? And she would say, yes, well, you can go to the store. Bring me back an Orange Crush. And I would go to the store, go down the road, cut across, come back in the road, and then my girlfriend would meet up at the road that leaded to the camp. And she would walk with me up to the camp. And I had did that for a couple of times, sneaking to see him. Finally, one of the boys that was coming over to see me came over that Sunday to take me to church. And I had left my grandmother's house and went up to the camp to see, on my way to the camp to see Winfred. And here he come along trying to get me to get back in the truck. And I said, no, I'm not getting in the truck. And he went back and told my parents that I was going to the camp. And that's how I got exposed. And I was on punishment, but I was punishing them too, because I stopped eating. I would just sit to the table and look at the food, and I wouldn't eat. And finally Winfred wrote a letter that my father got. And after he read that letter, I didn't know that he was reading the letter. He put it in the Bible on the 3rd Sunday. We had like first Sunday, second Sunday. Well, this was a 3rd Sunday, so he didn't have church. So he was reading the letter to my mom. And I didn't know it. He said, girl, put on some clothes, make yourself look decent. I had no idea. I thought when we going down the road, I'm thinking, when he turned by my grandmother's house, I said, oh my God, he's going out here and killing. I thought he was going to do something too, but never told me until we got out there. And then he called Winfred to the car. I was trembling. He called Winfred to the car and he said, young man, I'm going to bring her out to the house to see you, because things ain't going so good at the house. I had quit eating. And he said, but I want you to treat my daughter with respect. Don't take in them little shanty houses y'all got back there. Winfred told him that he wouldn't, and they let me out. And the smile that was on both of our face, for me to have the opportunity to come and see him, which I thought would never happen. And Winfred kissed me that Sunday in the church. I had never been kissed before on the lips. I've been kissed on the head, on the jaw and stuff. I'd never been kissed on the lips. And I almost passed out, I think. But it lasted. That kiss held my attention. And I'll still say to this day, that was the kiss that sealed the deal. I could not shake it. So after a while, things went on, but I was given the opportunity to write him. I could stop hiding and writing him, because I would write him at school. This was a job that I was doing within itself to get the chance to see him. And I was terrified of my mother, but I wanted to be with Winfred so bad until I was willing to take that chance. So, it was just a lot of things went on.
So those letters were a big part of your early love story. I wonder if you
would like to read one of those letters, the one
Please.
that I waited on. If you
Please
would
do.
like.
I was just going to ask you that. We would love to hear it, please.
Okay, this is the letter that I waited on for 3 years to hear. And I was so excited when I got it. Say, hi, darling. How is my future wife? Time is drawing near. By the time you get this letter, I will have about 5 days left. The 25th is the day I will be a free man. Yes, darling, I'm coming home. Your waiting and your suffering is over. I'm very anxious to see you and to touch you and to look once more into your beautiful eyes. I know it's going to be beautiful, holding and kissing you once more. I have been through hell thinking about knowing you need me and hoping I could hold on to you until I come home. You are a very strong young lady, and your love for me has got to be strong. For you to wait 3 years, it's not every day that a guy can find somebody that feels that way and care that much for him. I am thrilled to death that I got you. I appreciate you and most of all, I am glad you didn't turn me away the day I met you. That day will always remain in my mind. It was the start of something beautiful that has yet not started to lose its beauty. It's still the same way. It was on your back porch and in the church and every other time we've had a chance to express our love. Be sweet and be looking for me. Excuse me, just a second. Oh, I can't get the papers, but now I got it. Be looking for me between the 25th and the 30th. I get out the 25th. I might not get there the same day. Love and kisses, Winfred. I waited for that to hear that letter. And everybody thought I was crazy because nobody knew Winfred. In my hometown, nobody knew him.
So this was the beginning of a very long and deep love story. And Lillian, you witnessed
Yes.
the love between these two people. Can you just talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
as you hear her talking, she had this thing where she wanted to always dye my dad's hair jet black. And it was just a sweet moment. He's like, Patsy, you know, let's just leave a little gray. She said, no, I'm gonna dye my man hair black. She would pick his hairstyle and all that stuff. And he said, you know, Patsy, I'm not a young man anymore. She said, you're always my young man. So that's the sweetness of their love. And he would like gently touch her on the hand. And I realized there's so much that as a child and as an adult that those two together went through. Like, you know, when they first got married, they're staring into a hole in the ceiling, looking at the stars and just planning their lives. So, and another cute thing about they were dressing alike. So we were like, here come Gone with the Wind. We, as kids, we would make jokes because he'll be in his red suit, she'd be in her blue suit, and they're holding hands walking down the street. And our kids and our friends would be like, are they really that much in love? We were like, yes, they are. So and when I first heard about the letters, because she would always go in her room and we'd see her reading stuff. And she said, these are the letters your dad wrote me. And we're like, why would he write you? He's here. So we never really got that story until later on in life about these letters. Because as you're growing up, you hear stories about your dad being a chain gang, but it was never really detailed because he was still dealing with it and she was still dealing with it. They wanted to make us as happy as they could at that moment right now because it was a difficult life. So, but their love story, before we would get home from school, we could hear the music playing and we like, they're dancing now. And we would come into the house and they're playing Sam Cooke, Curtis Mayfield, he's singing and he's like, come on, Patsy, twirl for me. You know, and we're like, should we go outside and play? And then the fifth child comes, then the sixth child comes, then the seventh child comes. So their love, I mean, it's definitely a novel in itself.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of joy there. There were also tough times, and that's described in the book. I want to ask Patsy to just talk a little bit about the title of the book. Why do you think Winfred wanted to call it Chasing Me to My Grave? And then I'd love to hear both Patsy and Lillian talk a little bit about Winfred's legacy.
I'm brief on it. I'll be as brief as I possibly can on it. But Winfred was having nightmares, and he had been having them for a long time. He would wake up through the night And he had seeked help for it, but nothing really seemed to stop them completely. He would get some rest sometime, but he was having nightmares about the things that happened to him as a young man and as a child, and when he was on the chain gang. And he was sitting talking to me one day, and he looked at me with that look that he gives when he's serious. And he said, honey, ain't nothing nobody can do for me. He said, I'm gonna have these nightmares until I die. He said, they're gonna chase me to my grave. And I think when after he met you and he was thinking, that stayed on his mind about when y'all was trying to come up with a name for the book.
Mhm.
I think that played on him because we had talked about the problem that he was having and the nightmares that he was having. And I think he thought that that would be a good name for his book, Chasing Me to My Grave, because they didn't stop chasing him. He had those dreams right up until, well, nightmares or whatever you want to call them up until then, but for somebody to be tormented that much in their life, that even when they're asleep, they revisit that point in time in their life. It hurts me to know that he had to suffer those things. I couldn't help him with those. I couldn't change what he had been through, but I definitely tried to be there for him and to try to do whatever I could do once he was awake, but I never left his side
It's so
because
clear. Yeah,
I never left his side because there was nothing physically or mentally that I could do, but morally I could stand beside him.
I think it's so clear from the book how important you were in his life, both to facilitate, his becoming an artist and to support him as a person. It's just a really deep theme in the book. We want to make time for audience questions and discussion.
Yes.
But before I bring Elizabeth back in to ask that, let me just get a comment from each of you, Patsy and Lillian, about why you think this book is important. What can people learn from this book?
You want to go first, Donna?
Oh, sure. And to get back to the chasing me to my grave, I think my father was at the cusp of going from surviving to living. So for someone that had to fight all his life to be the good man and the bad man, I think that last self is the reason why the dreams kept coming more vividly, because he was at success. He was selling more and things like that. And my mom and him always had this game plan. What do we do the next 5 minutes from now? How are we going to get the next 10 minutes from now? And that had ended. So I think, it's the fight to, you're fighting to survive. And then he's like, okay, now we're living. So, I mean, it was literally chasing him to his grave. I believe it. Instead of, he went from looking for his mother to like, how do I take care of my wife? And I don't think he realized that he was ever going to get to this point where he would be okay. So I'm really proud to be his daughter, and I'm so happy for this to happen for him. I may have his last name, but this is definitely Winfred Rembert, and there'll never be another Winfred Rembert like him. There's two more, but there'll never be, this singing, loving, laughing, version of him. And I know he's smiling down at us. Every podcast mom does, especially with his little rabbit. Whatever she does it on behalf of their relationship, on him, so it's an honor, as always, no matter how difficult it is.
Thank you so much. Patsy, would you like to share some thoughts about the significance of the book before we turn it over to questions?
Yes, turn it over to the questions.
Okay.
Because I got so much to say. That's excellent.
So thank you so much, Erin, Patsy, and Lillian, for this really heartfelt conversation about Mr. Rembert. We've got two questions, but there was someone had commented on something you said, Lillian, which I couldn't agree with more. She said your quote about the trial and error of being yourself. It was really a powerful statement, and I think that a lot of us do try to be different people in different situations so that we could survive, and we can just come out of it sort of psychologically safe. So One of our first questions comes from one of our attendees who asked, how did this book come about? So what was the journey? I know that, Erin, you had reached out to Mr. Rembert about your first book around criminal justice, but there was so much more than just sort of two people meeting, right? Because I think after learning about Patsy's treasure trove of letters, I mean, there was, so can you talk a little bit about the journey to this book? And
Yes, I learned when I got to know Winfred that he wanted to tell his story as a book. And it was going to take some time to do that because there were a lot of details of his life he wanted to go through and organize to share with the public. And so I was interested in hearing his story, and we decided to try working together. He was looking for a writer. So I met with him and interviewed him. And then I wrote up the results of the first interview, kind of transcribing parts of the interview that I thought would be of a special interest in organizing them. And then I went back to New Haven. I live in Boston. He lived in New Haven, as you know. And so I would travel to his house and visit him and Patsy in their home and talk with Winfred about his life. So I came back with my pages and I read them out loud to Winfred. And he enjoyed that very much. And it provoked all kinds of thoughts to elaborate on his memories and what happened next. And I recorded that. And then we just went through the cycle of me going home, writing it up, coming back and reading it to him. And we spent about 2 years working on this project, me visiting their home every couple of times a month, interviewing him, coming back with my pages. And we did a lot of reading out loud and elaborating. And it issued in this book. It was following Winfred's experience and where he wanted to take it, and thinking with him about what he wanted to say and how to put it together into a story. And it was really, for me, an exercise in very careful listening and being open to where Winfred wanted to take the book. And I will point out that there's also a chapter in the book that tells Patsy's story, or at least part of her story. And
Yes.
It's a wonderful, powerful voice in the book, because you meet Patsy through Winfred's eyes, and you may have some sense of that from the conversation already. And then once we're into the book, pretty far into the book, there's Patsy telling her story and her voice about her love and relationship with Winfred and some of the trials and tribulations that they faced in their lives, and how they got through them and loved each other. So I'm very proud and excited that that's part of the book. And it's since you've been hearing Patsy talk, you know what an amazing woman she is, and how well she can describe things and capture just important moments in a person's life, both her own and Winfred's. So that's just a wonderful part of the book.
So Patsy, this question is for you. I mean, clearly you are the rock of Mr. Rembert's life, and just hearing your story about the early meeting and courtship, and then sort of realizing that Mr. Winfred was in a chain gang and imprisoned. How did you stay hopeful? Where did you draw your strength from?
Well, I draw my strength. I drew at that time was prayer. My mother had told me back when I was about 15 or 16 years old, if you ask the Lord to give you something, he'll give it to you. And I had asked, I was sitting on the porch one day and I was looking, this is where I feel I got my hope from. I was looking up at the moon, and I decided I'd talk with the Lord, and I asked him to send me somebody that I could love. Because there was a lot of people around me that said they loved me. So I needed somebody that I could love enough to leave home. And I felt like the Lord sent Winfred to me. And I just held on to that and kept praying and asking the Lord to give me strength. So day after day, he was who I would take his letters, go down into the woods and read them. That kept him alive within me and present. I would rather read his letter than to talk to another boy in the flesh. Simple as that.
And to piggyback on that, when my dad went to jail the second time, she doesn't give herself enough credit. A part of Patsy's story, she kept the family together. We had no place to stay, and when we moved to New Haven, it was just us and her with 7 kids, and trying to figure out how to feed us, clothe us, things like that. And I swear to you that she would have imaginary conversations with my father, and she would get up and keep it moving. I mean, it wasn't perfect all the time. Sometimes she would stop and she's like, nope, I got to keep this family together. So we would go and we have them all tethered together, the last 5, because they were so young. They were so young. And she's like, okay, you guys, she would put each one of us in charge of 2 like that. And so she said, we're going to keep our family together until your father get home, and everything's going to be all right when he gets home. And then we'll be a family together. So she has this unbelievable confidence and that them together will make everything work out. And it did. So when he came home, we were together and we were family again. But it was what, 7 months? A year?
6.
6. It was very difficult for her, but she found a way. She said, we're gonna be a family. And she would talk to my dad. We had this beat up car. The windshield wipers didn't work. We would go visit him. And she would like hustle money. She did pickets. She was on a picket line one time, didn't even work for the grocery store. She was doing that. Little jobs here and there. So I think
Yeah.
the love that she has for him really made her overcome a lot of difficulties.
We didn't even get into so many parts of the story, including one part of Winfred's life that Lillian was just referring to, which was the struggle of making ends meet with a prison record, and ending up, dealing drugs and going back to prison some years later, the hardship on him and on the family. And the book, helps you understand really how it ended up, how hard it was for Winfred to get and keep a job with the prison record he had, and just sort of, what that context was like. And when you were talking about that, I was looking at the chat and I saw one of the participants here who said he's emotional about listening to this discussion because he spent 27 years of his life in prison. This is Eugene, 13 years in solitary confinement, which was something that Winfred also experienced. And it just made me think about how one of the things that's so important about Winfred's book is that he's telling the story not only of himself, but of so many other people who struggled under Jim Crow racism. And now in some ways, the connection with the era of mass incarceration and the kind of, the way in which incarceration is destroying people's lives. And I know,
if I may,
please.
I would just like to interrupt right there. Winfred's life and the things that he went through then are still happening now. His life is a reflection of what's going on today. And the purpose of this book, I feel like in my heart, is to give people the knowledge of the mistreatment that we received then. We're receiving it now. So let's stop. I think his book is an educational book. It's a book that we can learn from. We can learn how prejudice held one person down, but it held a whole lot of people down. The story Winfred is telling, it's got to be, he was not the only one that this was done to, because we can see it now happening. So we need people to take notice and try to change, because his book is a reflection of what's going on now. There's a lot of things going on today that happened to Winfred then, and he was not the only one that this happened to. Every time I see the story about Emmett Till, I think about that young boy. He didn't have the opportunity to tell his story or tell what was being said, but Winfred lived in order to be able to tell the story and the things that were said to you before you die, before they hang you. I feel like that was Winfred's purpose. The Lord saved him to be able to tell the story of many others, because Winfred was not the only one that these type of things happen. But the Lord granted him the power and the understanding to be able to meet somebody like you, to write this story so people can see it ain't so long ago that these things happened to him and they still happen today.
Do all of you have a few minutes if we have some questions in our audience, if someone would like to ask?
Of course.
You stay for a few more minutes. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. You could use the raise hand feature and we can call on you. So Nancy Hanneman, raise your hand. Nancy, do you want to ask a question? I'm going to try to find. Okay. There you go. Nancy, you want to ask your question?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say it's been really one of the great pleasures and blessings of my husband's in my life to actually have a chance to meet Winfred and Patsy and talk with them, my sister, Sharon and Philip and Phil McBlain. Winfred and I were born a month apart in 1945, and I marvel at the way he lived his life. Patsy or Lillian, how do you think his birth being given to his great aunt to raise him, how did that affect his life?
Once Winfred found out that he was adopted, and he got the opportunity to meet his sisters and brothers on both sides, it was he couldn't understand why nobody wanted him, even though Miss Lillian loved him dearly. It was not a complete family. There was no man in the house, and he didn't see that togetherness as he saw with his brothers and sisters when they was with they had both parents. And I think it affected him at the point that he felt like he was not wanted by either one of his parents, but that I don't think that was the case. But that is the way he was viewing it at the time. We talked about it, and I explained to him I felt like his mother didn't have a choice. And his father was married, she was married. Where's this illegitimate child gonna go? She took him to who she thought would be the very best option was to give him, but he couldn't see it that way at that time. Once he learned who he was and learned that he was adopted, was given away, it left a hole in him. It left a hole in his heart. And he was always trying to fill it. And family was the main thing constantly on his mind, was keeping his family together. He wanted to be there for his children. He was not going to be an absentee father. So there's so much that came up, but that is my answer to that question.
Well, I think he was always on the outside looking in, but it also helped us stay together because he will always say, you guys are your own gang. You don't need to join a gang. And he had this thing, there's no need to join a gang. We are a gang. There's like 8 of you, play with each other. So, and another about that is every time we had mealtime, as he liked to say, we all had to check in and come home, and he would have a prayer. Him and my mother would say, thank you for bringing us to this table and making sure this table is unbroken. We're all home. And even before he would leave off for work, he would gather me and my 2 older brothers to the door, and he said, remember, y'all in charge, take care of your mom and the little ones. So he would always stress what was missing in his life, he wanted to give us. So no matter how much we were struggling, we had each other. And I think that's what he was missing. That was one of the things he was chasing. He was chasing his parents. And to be in the same area where you see people that look like you, that are family with you, and you're still not a part of that, I could see how that would hurt his soul. But then he had us. And, you know, sometimes things aren't enough. As much as he loved us, that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing for anybody to deal with. And then to be compounded on the back, to be Black and to have all this abuse after all that. You always wanted, he ran for his mother to save him and she couldn't do anything. So it's just tough. It was really tough for him. So
I think one of the things that I found really moving about working with Winfred on this book was to see him kind of working through and confronting his feelings about having been relinquished by his mother, and through doing his artwork and talking with Patsy about it, finding some kind of peace and understanding, a little bit of compassion for his mother by the end of the book that wasn't there at the beginning. I just found that really, really meaningful and moving to witness, you know, this person, sort of the importance to him of thinking through this aspect of his life as an older person at the end of his life. And I think he was successful in achieving some kind of sense of forgiveness and compassion for his mother, even though he had suffered so much in his life. And he had this idea he might not have had to go through all of that had she not given him up.
Thank you so much, Patsy, Lillian, and Aaron, for this really wonderful and this incredible presentation on the life of Mr. Rembert. Someone did mention in chat the retrospective of his work at Fort Gansevoort in New York City. Can you share some details?
There's a gallery that has a show up of Winfred's work right now at Fort Gansevoort is the name of the gallery. It's on 9th Avenue in New York City. And I think the exhibit is on just for a few more days. It has a wonderful set of about 20 paintings that tell Winfred's story. And it's beautifully done. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. I guess if there's no other questions, we can start to wrap up. I do want to mention that the library does own copies of the book, Chasing Me to My Grave, but it's also available at all the big bookstores.
where did I go?
And Lily or Patsy, do
There
you
you
guys have a bookstore that you recommend that where for people? Because I'm sure there's like some bookstores, independent bookstores here, especially in New Haven, that perhaps people might buy a copy from.
Well, I believe Atticus has it now. That's one of his favorite places to go. I believe they had the book. I haven't gone down there. I've been taking the habit when the book first came out, taking pictures with the book at Target, Walmart, and stuff that, and sending it to my mother, posting it on Facebook. I said, I'm with my dad right now. It was just such a sense of pride. And I would call, we group chat. My mom's like, what are you doing? I'm finding dad's book everywhere. That's what I'm doing. So the same thing as like finding his paintings everywhere. I'm in awe of him and my mother at this moment, and in awe of Aaron, because I'm reading this book and I hear my parents' voice. I hear my father's voice. And I also hear the man that I didn't have a chance to know in this book. So that's the greatest gift he gives his kids. We get to see our father. So the journey he had, like she said, with his mother, I get to have that same journey and understanding him a lot better than I would have without this book. There's only so many conversations you can have, and he just laid it out to bear. And so the book's also his audio book. You can find this book anywhere. It's even independent places. I just thank you, Aaron, for being with our family as rambunctious as we can be sometimes. It's a lot. He's only been away in March, but he's still around. He's still with us, laughing, joking, telling me I'm fixing something wrong and helping me fix it right. And I mean, and if it's not at that bookstore, tell them they should have it at that bookstore.
Right, yes, good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do the same thing he did. Just go into a meeting and just bum rush it and say, you deserve to have me here, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, so I think for those of you who are just discovering Winfred Rembert, this, I hope, is just the beginning of your journey, right? It's besides Chasing Me to the Grave, I think Aaron mentioned a couple of documentaries. There's a New Yorker article that's extremely powerful. So I I hope that this really starts a journey to learning more about Winfred and his work and his life. Thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you next time.
One more place you can get it at Phil McBlain's bookstore in Hammond. And you can see some of his work.
McLean
Thank you,
Park.
Patsy.